Welcome to First Mile's Climate Heroes. I'm your host, Bruce Bratley, founder of recycling company First Mile. On this show, we meet and learn from the climate heroes who are building solutions right now to tackle climate change. Today's guest is an author, activist, and founder of two businesses with the aim of closing the knowledge gap between humans and their understanding of our Earth systems. To do this, Cindy Forde has written a children's book called Bright New World, runs Can Do, which is an app where people get paid to work for Earth, nature being the ultimate boss, of course, and she runs Planetari, an educational community that is aligned to all 17 of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, and we're looking forward to getting into that. And Cindy, welcome to First Mile's Climate Heroes. Great to have you on the show.
Well, it's lovely to be here, Bruce. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your fantastic community.
It's a pleasure. And I mean, wow, you've got a lot going on. So, I mean, sounds hugely busy and looking forward to hearing about all of these things. But first of all, can you give our listeners an introduction of how you became a climate hero and where you're making an impact?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm a hero, Bruce. I think probably everybody who tries to do what they can is a hero. If that's the definition, then I fall into that category. I mean, I was very lucky in a way. I had parents that were extremely switched on about what was happening on planet Earth, even many years ago, from the environmental side of it and the climate justice or the human rights side. So I really didn't have a choice. I grew up within the environment movement and I was quite not instrumental, but I was quite active in the anti-apartheid movement. I think all these things are really linked because we don't get systems change really without reevaluating how we operate as a human family, and that works across how we treat the planet and how we treat people. So most of my career, if you can call it that, has been spent in some form of activism, whether that's direct, as when I was much younger as a student, we took direct action as frontline activists, or whether that's working either within the system, for example, within corporate social responsibility or ESG investing. I had the great good fortune to work with some of the pioneers of sustainability investing, or really trying now to build new models, which is what I'm doing very much with my organisation Planetari. This is really trying to build a new model of how we educate humans and tell new stories, because I think politics is downstream of culture. If we have a different set of narratives about Earth, we make different choices about how we live here. So telling different stories for Earth as a writer and a creator, for me, is a really important part of making systemic change.
So when we go to school now, it's all very much about being in your head, but there's a movement around head, heart and hand. Is that where you are to get people to sort of experience nature with their heart and their hands as well, or is it something else?
Well, I think that's really important, Bruce. Sure, you can't just live in your head. I think part of the problem is human beings over the last, certain human beings in the global north over the last 200-300 years have seen themselves as more and more detached from nature, from the Enlightenment, that sort of mechanistic worldview at nature as a machine that you can use as a set of component parts that you can extract, and humans are somehow outside of that. I think that if we can reconnect to nature with our hearts and with our spirits, then we start to see ourselves as part of this incredible self-regulating ecosystem. So really, the way our education would work is that we do understand what our planetary boundaries are. I'm sure some of the listeners, if not all, will be familiar with the work of Johan Rockström, the Stockholm Resilience Centre, which has identified these 9 planetary boundaries, which are very much our life support system, like our lungs, our hearts, our liver. If we operate as we do our human bodies, if whatever we do means that we keep healthy, keep within these boundaries, then we can work out how to live in balance in planet Earth. Whether we want to be astrophysicists or hairdressers, everything that we now do has to be within the limits of these planetary boundaries. Indeed, now we need to find ways of working that help these to regenerate, because we pushed over the limits on 7 actually already of these 9 boundaries.
Sorry, I was going to ask which one we've got closest to. So we're over capacity on 7 of the 9.
Yeah, we are, which is, is a pretty critical situation. But the positive news is these things are a lot of the damage, not all of it, is reversible or mitigatable, and that's why it's critical to have a new generation of humans that understand, what we can do to be part of regenerating, rather than caught in this old paradigm of extracting to extinction, which is very much what a lot of our companies are, what people are educated to do, for want of understanding different models.
And what are just for the listeners that haven't heard of the planetary boundaries, can you give us a couple of examples, and maybe the ones that have been maybe one exceeded and one not exceeded?
Yeah, well, I would strongly recommend, if people are interested, please do go and look them up. But there are simple things, relatively simple things that we know: how we treat our carbon sinks, our oceans, our rainforests, how we manage our biodiversity. There must be space for biodiversity. The pollutants that we put into our air and our water, the nitrogen, the phosphates. Those are again, they're relatively simple to say, but they're, if you go on to if you Google the 9 planetary boundaries, you'll see them in much more detail. But it's really what we're taking out of Earth and what we're putting in, which is causing these to go terribly out of balance.
And what are you doing then with Planetari? Is it Planetari or Planetari? Sorry.
Tomato, really. So however you feel happy saying it, Bruce.
Planetari. What are you doing with Planetari? What's the business there?
Well, Planetari really is this educator. If we are going to have, to build a world with a future, the sooner we are able to understand what that looks like, the better, really. So children, I do believe, land eco-literate. So instead of a model really that's designed, our education systems very much reflected the needs and the demands of the Industrial Revolution. Now we have a whole different set of needs as a human family. So the planetary is an education system that is set up to align with the planetary boundaries, or if you like, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so children learn whatever it is that they're learning. It doesn't change the subjects that we need to know: history, geography, economics, art, literature, as they go on through the system. But it does so that they're taught in line with, so you understand these subjects in the context of the planetary boundaries and of what we are going to need to do. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, they're not perfect, there's 17 of them, but they do set out a roadmap for the human family to achieve something that looks like sustainable development. So if we know that that's our roadmap, why are we not teaching towards that in our schools? And that's what Planetari is setting out to design, really. It's an education system that enables young people to learn within that framework.
And is this about enriching the current curriculum to include education around the planetary boundaries, or is it almost like a separate module or a separate GCSE, separate A-level? Will it become a compulsory subject? How are you going to try and interlace them into sort of standard?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Bruce. It is really systemic. You can't just bolt on an A-level in earth sciences or something and expect to get systemic change. It's, if we're learning about, let's take history or economics. Let's take economics. If you're learning how about economics and you're using models that are really much based on, for example, we have one measure of value, GDP, and that can't continue. If you're measuring country success by GDP, it doesn't matter whether you've sold weapons, whether the money has been generated cleaning up after ecological disasters. It's just giving you one number. We know there's much more holistic ways of understanding, of keeping balance. Nature has to be on the balance sheet. We've got the superb work of Kate Raworth with donut economics. So we're using systems to teach children that as the world as it was, rather than the world as it will be. So yes, we are looking at creating resources for teachers that can bring it in to the curriculum where there's space. For example, people always think sustainability sits in geography, but we are actually looking at doing something much wider than that, where we are designing a new curriculum as well, so that whatever the subject is taught, there's an awareness of how we are part of Earth systems. The history that we've told, history is another thing that, the history is very much one of colonization, in a way glorifying these things or telling a partial truth of what happened. We have to relook at what the history of the world really has meant in terms of where we've ended up. In some ways, what we saw as progress, we now understand as the roots of our demise. And if you teach that in schools, children are less likely to try to replicate that in the ambitions that they have, and to really understand that we need to follow a different path or pioneer different pathways to get different results. If we keep, as Einstein famously said, if we keep using the same thinking, we'll get the same problems. We cannot find the solutions with the same thinking that created them. So it's a very much a systemic shift in education, at the same time as providing teachers and educators with what they need in the short term to get these subjects onto the curriculum. But definitely not bolting on something to the edge. It's transformation throughout the whole system.
First Mile is the UK's leading waste management service. We help over 30,000 businesses reduce their carbon impact with our award-winning range of recycling solutions. Go to our website, which is thefirstmile.co.uk, to get started today. If you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe. We have brand new episodes every Wednesday. On a sort of scale of 1 to 10, I mean, how 10 being good, where are we, do you think, in terms of the curriculum and educating children in the real world and what the future is going to look like, rather than some sort of strange colonial history or maths?
Yeah, well, it really depends on the teachers, because there's absolute superb teachers out there. And if they've got the fight and they've got the willingness to push it, then they can push things through. But that's really exhausting, and it shouldn't be left to teachers to have to do that. And there's superb organisations that are developing different curriculums, like Thoughtbox, which is run by Rachel Mewson. Reboot the Future is a fantastic resource for children, for teachers on this. But it should really be coming from the top down. And we have a government, I'm afraid, that has not accepted the reality of this. And it's congratulated itself on creating a world-class curriculum in sustainability. But what that actually translates to is adding a GCSE in natural history, which just is not enough. And without the mandate, the schools can't change quickly enough, because they have to teach to test. And if they're considered, all of their assessment is based on how well the children pass these exams. So unless the subjects themselves cannot, unless you're being asked to learn a different type of knowledge, it's very, very hard for the schools to change. And the teachers and the children are aware of that, but without a mandate from the top, it's much harder to make the changes that we'd all like to see, that we all know are necessary. It's slightly easier in primary schools, but secondary school, you're really locked into this, as you say, old colonial model in economics, history, and basically, many other subjects.
How are you making the change? I mean, how operationally is Planetari actually getting? Are you lobbying? How are you trying to get the system to change?
Yeah, we're trying to create really fabulous resources that people will want to use. My book's just come out, Bright New World. We're building a curriculum around that. So at each of those sections that I talked about, energy, food, transport, oceans, travel, they actually have supporting resources around it that work across disciplines, so that you can use them for art, you can use them for science, you can use them for maths, history, but those are the topics. There's always topics in curriculums, but those are the topics that you learn again. So we're developing that and getting that used where we can. I'm carry on writing, I'm a writer, so I'm writing these stories. The fantastic Amitav Ghosh and Ben Okri have put out really powerful calls to writers and creatives. They're saying, there's never been a time in human history that is more important for anybody with an agency or with a platform to tell stories for change than to tell them or to help publish them, as you're doing with your brilliant podcast. And then, yes, it is a matter of working with the other people in this transformative education space, for want of a better word, and being advocates for change, and building allies, and building a much broader understanding of why this type of education is critical.
And what's your favourite story that you like to tell, where we see this sort of, which is an agent for positive change? Can you share that? Well,
that's slightly tricky, actually, because it does depend on the audience that I'm speaking to. I mean, I think sometimes for secondary schools, I think, again, because it does come from my own history, my own past, that I think that, when we look at Nelson Mandela, a man who was in prison for 27 years, but the British government, for example, called him that black terrorist. And we were in the same way that the climate protesters are now being arrested and given just become more draconian jail sentences. We were arrested for standing up and saying, actually, this man needs to come out. He's one of the greatest freedom fighters the world has ever seen. And now I don't ever meet a single person that remembers Nelson Mandela as anything but the greatest freedom fighter that the world has ever seen. And yet it was only, it was 20, 30 years ago that was it. So the change does happen, and it happens really completely. Things do flip. And when they flip, they just flip. The whole system flips with them. And so I think while we're in this ridiculous situation that you're seeing climate scientists now being arrested, I have huge hope for saying, hey guys, we need to change this. It's killing all of us. I think that we're going to see that flip really fast as well. Common sense just kind of hits, the pressure comes. You see this fight, as we saw with apartheid, we saw with the civil rights movement, to maintain this old order. And then suddenly it just disintegrates, and it creates the space. Well, it's not suddenly, it's the pressure coming from all points. And the people have been working, like you, the business leaders, the educators, there's a whole other fabric in our society there that's ready, that's been working for years to create something that's much, much healthier that then moves in. So I think we really are we're reaching those tipping points. The absurdity is apparent to almost everybody, unfortunately, apart from the people that are desperately hanging on to these levers of power.
Exactly. And even if we make the world cleaner and better and a better place to live in, and it turns out that actually we didn't need to do any of that, and the climate crisis wasn't actually happening, we're still going to have a much nicer place to live. It doesn't really matter. It's sort of win-win. Yeah,
I would find it incredibly hard to agree with anything that said the climate crisis isn't happening. We've all seen what's happened globally across the world this summer. I mean, I think you'd have to be in a pretty entrenched sense of denial not to see that. But you're absolutely right. The answers to mitigating that are also the ones that bring around a much more just and fair society with far less huge divisions in inequality. And so, hopefully, as a human family, we pass through this level of, it's almost like a teenager. We've gone mad. We've used up all the toys. We've gobbled up all the sweets. We've beaten up other kids in the playground. And now we've kind of growing up, and we walk out the other side and say, hey, actually, if we organised it in this way, if we shared, if we cared a bit more, if we dared to do things differently, we would have a much nicer place. And I hope as a human family, we're gradually getting to that realisation.
Changing subject, Cindy, can you tell us about Makerzines? Is this all about using your hands and to learn with, or something else?
Yeah, no, it really is. I used to run the Cambridge Science Centre, which was a hands-on science and discovery centre. And you look at how children learn. They learn in very different ways. And like when children actually get their hands on, so if you're exploring electricity, you get your hands on a Van de Graaff generator, or on a centrifugal force, you've got this fantastic lived experience of it. It's much more exciting for children to learn that way, and the learning takes place in their brains in a much more engaged way. I think the way that we do enable children to learn does have to shift, because sort of locking children in the classroom in front of a desk for 5-6 hours a day, your brain's switched off really after a couple of hours. So mixing it up with movement and with these different types of learning, I think, are very important. So the Makerzine came from that. So when you get a beautiful adventure, we call them an exploration, and you open them up, and yes, there's part magazine, it gives you facts, but there's partly things to make. So you've learnt about, for example, creating a marine protected area and why it's important. Then you get to make your own. There's a pocket in the back of the Makerzine, we call it the cargo pack, and you pull things out and you've made your own marine protected area as a mobile, or you've made your own oyster reseeding bed, and so that you can actually see, you put the creatures in, you put the anchor species in the oysters, and then all the other little creatures come back and they live in this beautiful oyster hotel. But because, I can't have, the physical exhibits are extremely expensive and cumbersome. We did create a van that you could move them all around, put them in the back of a van, take them anywhere. But the Makerzines are a kind of a paper-based version of that. So children get this hands-on making experience, which hopefully teachers, educators can extend in the classroom environment or the home environment. But it really is, hey, let's get up from our desk and let's get our hands on and let's learn about these things in a different set of, dimensions.
Brilliant. I love it. Fantastic. So I guess I was going to ask you about oceans and blue, but you've answered the question, because in you talk about educating children around food and food systems, transport, energy, oceans, and you can sort of experience most of them in your day-to-day life. You can try some different food, you can get the bus or cycle, walk, but I guess you've answered the question around oceans, because I was like figuring how on earth do you get children to learn about and experience the oceans? But I think is it that simple, or do we need to get people to the seaside more?
Well, I think, I mean, there's the hopefully, the magazines, with the magazine experience, that was it. You get your hands on, you get things. But I think if people can, the sea is 70% of our planet is ocean. And yet so many of us live really far away. It makes every other breath that we breathe. It is our biggest part, our most vital organ, but people live very far away from it. So if there are ways that you can get to sea, great. But there's also so many beautiful sea stories and sea films, not just the incredible Blue Planet that David Attenborough so brilliantly brought to us, but there's fantastic The Little Mermaid. There's all sorts of incredible sea stories that children love, that wake them up to these glorious creatures that live there. I mean, I think VR has a really great role to play. I've just had a fantastic VR experience going into the rainforest. So I think there's a lot more imagination that you can use to bring the sea into people's lives, even if they can't actually get down to the seaside. But yeah. And
from a sort of a cultural perspective, a sort of either an artist or a musician or a leader, who are the younger generation identifying with in terms of the climate? Is it still Greta Thunberg, or is it someone else? I mean, who are the sort of cultural figureheads or bands or things or films that young people tend to identify with now?
Well, I think that I think young people are so varied, Bruce. I'd have a hard time putting a finger on anyone, particularly I'm a bit out of touch as well, because things change very quickly. There's some incredible young climate leaders. There's the Sunshine Movement in the States that are bringing great laws to pass, to actually to make legal challenges to children's right to have a future. I'm not so sure about musicians. There's beautiful books there's so many now that are coming out with which really enable children to take there's the Wolf Brothers series. There's all sorts that give not anthropomorphize, but actually tell a story from an Earth-centric story, which I think children love and seem to be responding extremely well to. But I wouldn't presume to know there's a fantastic organisation called Rewriting Extinction. They have the most important comic book on Earth, which is Stories to Save the World. But the brilliant thing about that's headed up by a fantastic person called Paul Goodenough, and he's worked on with the Marvel Universe people, so he really knows how to tell these stories in a way that are short, punchy, engaging, and in really contemporary language. He engages with the celebrities that the children love, so that they see, oh, he said it was great, so therefore I'm interested. And I think that's a really good way of doing it, because I think one of the problems is these things live in bubbles, in echo chambers. That the most important thing is to get them into the mainstream consciousness. So there's a lot happening out there.
That was super interesting, Cindy. So the book, Bright New World, is that available everywhere, or is there a website people need to go to find a copy of that?
No, the Bright New World is available on everything from Amazon to bookshop.org, Blackwell's, Waterstones. There's my own website, cindyforde.world. But you'll find it anywhere, really, hopefully.
Brilliant.
I do hope so.
In the little time remaining, I just wanted to talk quickly about Can-Do. What is it? And this is sort of doing jobs for planet Earth. Can you explain what we're doing now?
Yeah, well, Can-Do is a concept that we're trying to bring to life. It's quite tricky, but the idea behind Can-Do is, yes, you get paid to work for Earth. So instead of the most important jobs done, the jobs that look after Earth's systems being voluntary, which is a lot of the regenerative work now is done by volunteer organisations, you're actually going to get paid for it. So instead of your side hustle driving an Uber, you can actually go on the app, you can find a local climate positive job near you, and then you can do that and you can get paid, whatever, your little bit of extra money to do this work. And just as we were saying, people who are really battling the cost of living crisis, they're going to have to get up and go out to work and do whatever you need to survive. So why not be able to pick up this app and say, I can earn a bit of extra money, planting mangroves, cleaning up a beach, distributing food that would otherwise be wasted. It's that kind of job that we're trying to get on this app and get that to work.
And who pays for the work to get done? Governments, corporations?
Well, that's the harder part of Can Do, is getting the idea would be that corporates pay a subscription so that their employees can use the app. And then, so that goes into a fund. Philanthropists would pay into a Can Do fund. So instead of funding a particular piece of conservation work, you pay into the fund so that people can get paid to change their habits and do this kind of work. And those would be the two main sources of funding. And sometimes conservation work comes with its own funding to get done, so that can go into the fund and it mobilises people to do this work.
And then I love the idea. So if Coca-Cola or McDonald's give you, millions of pounds to invest in sort of conservation work, would they then get some data back to say what the sort of social and environmental good that they were doing?
Well, that's the other part of the Can Do model. So from a user, it looks really simple. I live in Balham. I want to do some work in my area. I'll go on the app, I'll find a job. But what we're actually doing is collecting huge swathes of data about, so yes, if you're a corporate subscriber, you'll get a dashboard which shows you our money went, we paid X amount of money, this translated into X number of our employees doing this amount of work, enabling X amount of people in the general neighbourhood to do this amount of work. The impact of that was, and we aggregate the impact of the jobs that are done and look at those according to the metrics of project drawdown. So there's a huge piece of data behind Can Do as well that's really trying to get nature on the balance sheet, which I think is becoming more and more important to more organisations. The New York Stock Exchange just launched the SEIA Index, which is all about that, shifting how we account for value on planet Earth. So that's those are definitely the strands of Can Do that we're trying to work on.
I love that concept. I mean, it does sound hard to get off the ground, but it's a fantastic concept. And if people want to read more about that, where can they learn more about Can Do? And it's spelt with a K.
K-A-N.
K-A-N.
There's a www.cando.world. There's a website which is where we're working on that. We're just building the pilot now, one in the UK and one in the States. So that'll give more details around that.
On this show, we're building a Hall of Fame for climate heroes, and we always ask our wonderful guests to leave something in First Mile's Climate Heroes Hall of Fame. So, what or who would it be?
Well, I really love the work that a very good friend of mine, Jess Hines, is doing to create what's something called a climate content lab, which is changing the whole way that cinema responds to climate change. So we have absolutely wonderful films that tell these new stories of Earth in a really engaging way, not just the usual in the bubble documentary, but they're really exciting adventure stories, they're love stories, they're romances, they're dramas, but in them is the content that will help us to wake up and realise what we can do around climate change. Politics is downstream of culture, and if we shift our culture with these incredible stories that excite us and engage us, then we shift how we think and we start to move out of this crisis as a human family. So Climate Content Hub is going in the Climate Heroes Hall of Fame for me for today.
Perfect. So Cindy, what is the best book, in your opinion, ever written on climate change, or indeed best TV programme, film, poem, audio file?
Well, there's just so many that are brilliant. I think Jonathan Porritt's latest book, Hope in Hell, does a fantastic job of bringing together all the different strands of climate change and what we need to get out of there. So I definitely put Hope in Hell as my number one. I think Ben Okri's new book, Tiger Tales, from the creative and poetry side of things, is also brilliant because he tells stories and he writes poems which wake us up in a different kind of way. So I'd like to put in those two, if that's all right. Sneaked in two there. Sorry.
Perfect. Brilliant. I mean, it's fantastic to me. Fantastic to hear about all of the initiatives and work that you're taking, which I think is hugely, hugely important. What does success look like for you and Planetari and Can Do? I mean, what does it look like?
Well, we do this. We step into the future. 10 years from now, it's wonderful. The children are in the classrooms. They're learning. They've got education is earth led. They've got this sense of if we take care of, we learn how to take care of planet Earth here. And therefore, if I'm going to be an energy supplier, or I'm going to be an astronaut, or I'm going to be a car designer, or I'm going to be a shoemaker, they know how to do everything with the planetary boundaries. So in 10 years' time, that won't just be my work, but I would hope that the advocacy that we do, and all the incredible transformative educators have got through that barrier, and that's how children learn. This curriculum has shifted so people understand that if planet Earth, if we put Earth first, our life support system first, then whatever we innovate helps us to survive as a human family rather than fuels our demise. So that's what success would look like for me, Bruce, would be having those learning models in place in schools across the world, really.
That's fantastic. I hated being at school, but I'd go back to school if it was that good. It'd be superb. Cindy, it's been amazing having you on First Miles Climate Heroes. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and fantastic to hear all of your stories.
Oh, thank you so much, Bruce. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here, and I really am extremely grateful for you for making the time to speak to people like me and making these stories more accessible to the wider world as well. Hopefully there's lots of inspiration for people in the work that you do and the work that they hear about other people making possible as well.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. I'm Bruce Bratley, and you've been listening to First Miles Climate Heroes, where we meet incredible people making an impact to tackle climate change. If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review and subscribe to the show. We have brand new episodes every Wednesday.